All right, good morning folks, and welcome to this public meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations. My name is Julian Morse. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake and the chair of this standing committee. Today, Boreal Cultivation and the Department of Finance will provide presentations regarding the Cannabis Products Act as part of the statutory review of the Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Implementation Act. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed to the Assembly's social media channels. I will now ask members in the room and online to introduce themselves for the record, starting with Mr. Rogers, and then we'll move around the table and then go online.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Denny Rogers. I'm the MLA for Nuvik-Boot Lake. Welcome this morning. Thank you for taking the time to come and present.
Good morning. Robert Hawkins, MLA for Yellowknife Center, and as always, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We'll move online. Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Kate Reed. I'm the MLA for Great Slave, and welcome to our guests today.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to remind all members who are well aware, and particularly our witnesses, just that we need to direct all comments through the chair. That's just for the purposes of the audio visual to keep things running smoothly. Wait to be recognized before speaking. It'll help us have a smooth meeting. I'm now going to pass it on to Mr. Damian Healy and Mr. Jordan Harker from Boreal Cultivation. Please proceed with your presentation, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Damian Healy, and to my right is Jordan Harker, and we're two of the owners of Boreal Cultivation, a licensed production facility in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, one and only of its kind. I'd like to begin by thanking committee and chair for allowing this opportunity for us to present. I know you guys have a busy schedule, so appreciate the time. Also, thank committee for touring our facility earlier this week. We always enjoy visitors at our facility. Not a lot of people go through the facility, so we hope it was of benefit to both committee and yourselves. Today we have a brief presentation, I think, that will highlight areas SCOGO can help us modernize the Cannabis Products Act and subsequent regulations. These updates and small changes that we're hoping you guys will endorse and recommend to Department of Finance will help our business grow and be more consistent with regulations in other jurisdictions who have modernized their respective acts since inception in 2018. For the presentation, both Jordan and I will be speaking. We'll be tag teaming it, and we'll ask the person to advance to the next slide, please, where Jordan will speak to who we are.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Boreal is a family and friend-owned licensed producer, first in the NWT and only in the NWT. We started this company up in about 2019 in the design phase. We purposely designed and built our facility based on specs given by the federal government that we must meet. Originally, the federal government regulation would give licenses if we met a bunch of criteria based on their regulations that must be met through application and paperwork. About 3/4 of the way through this process, they changed with net zero warning, sort of the acceptance process that we would have to have a facility fully built with all things being met within that spec. This was obviously a huge wrench for us because we now had to build a multi-million-dollar facility with no warning before we get a license. So to convince lenders that don't worry, we'll get a license once the thing is built, just give us the money, was a very challenging thing for us. The road to that license was met with many things, and that was obviously one of the biggest ones. One of the biggest hurdles that we met right at the start was a Bank of Montreal for financing yanked about $500,000 worth of working capital from us. This put us behind the 8 ball when it came to purchase growing equipment, lights, processing equipment, and ever since then we've been trying to sort of come up with that money to get that equipment to be able to produce enough flower to put ourselves in a good position. This was super challenging from the get-go, and it's been hard to climb back up from that ever since. We currently now are licensed processor and producer. We are we have our product in Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nunavut, and Yukon. We're exporting our pre-rolls and dried flower within those provinces. And obviously in NWT, we have a large presence as well with retail. Could you forward the next slide, please? Currently, we have 7 employees right now. We are a full cultivator, which means we start all of our plants from seed. We grow them to a vegetative state, flower them out, and then we also process this product to a packageable and sellable product that we ship to the provinces and territories. We do everything from growing to bucking to grinding and milling this product. We turn this product into multiple different SKUs in a dried flower product, in a pre-roll product as well. This takes a lot of manpower, takes a lot of equipment, and there's a lot of steps along the way that are put in place by the federal government that we must meet, and it requires a lot of detail in handling the product through the growing phase and also packaging. Next slide, please.
So I'll speak to this one. Cannabis Product Act, where change is needed. These are the small requests we're coming to committee with today. So brief history on us requesting change. This isn't the first time we've approached government asking for changes to the regulations since coming into force in 2018. In November of 2022, I approached the Department of Finance asking to fill an application out for what's an SOP, Special Occasion Permit. So that's something that's at the behest of ministers. This is a permit that allows special events such as slow pitch tournaments, folk on the rocks, jamborees, community gatherings, to allow a permit to be filled out to have a special event which would allow something like liquor for resale. So resale being the key word. At the time of November 2022, it was met with some resistance and change. There was no process in place for an application for a special occasion permit. It wasn't developed yet in the regulations. It was met with a myriad of government jargon about not on the legislative agenda, staff not capable of delivering it, and wait for new government. Long story short, there's no special occasion permit for cannabis resale. Resale being the key word. Resale is not in the regulations. To quote the minister, if the word resale was in the regulations, we would be able to apply for a special occasion permit to allow sales at different special events. This would help our business from an economic development standpoint. Special events that can sell liquor for a profit. Everybody understands that economic development model. It would be no different from cannabis. Cannabis consumption is happening at special events. We'd be blind to say it isn't. There's no reason a retail store in Yellowknife and Nuvik, anywhere else, Fort Simpson, Hay River, Fort Smith, couldn't take advantage of a special occasion permit and drive some economies into different communities. So one of the changes we'd be asking for is update the regulations to allow for special occasion permits to be applied for, not only by us, but to other retailers or businesses that would be interested in it. In addition to what I've said for slow pitch tournaments, folk on the rocks, weddings would also be applicable to SOPs. The first bullet is something called Farmgate. And for those that don't know, we're looking to be on position and par with other provinces that allow Farmgate. So Farmgate is the ability for licensed producers similar to us to be able to sell their product out of their own building and facility. This is, in my opinion, no different from the brew pub in Old Town selling beer that they've produced and made out of their own facility, much to the community's benefit and enjoyment. Farmgate would allow us, it wouldn't be a huge monetary gain for us, but Farmgate would allow us for people to come into our building, which isn't an issue security-wise, but it would allow people to come into our building to purchase stuff that we've grown, cultivated through the processes that Jordan's mentioned. We've been approached by tourism companies that want to come into our facility, tour it, and to show to show tourists what we do. Both Jordan and I are born and raised here. We understand there's long winters, and we know what tourism looks like in the winter. This would be in addition to a secondary economy and a driver for the economy, which I know this committee is interested in. Farmgate would allow us some sales. There's precedent for it. Ontario allows for Farmgate. Nova Scotia allows for Farmgate. Saskatchewan's got a kind of hybrid model. BC's allows for Farmgate. And to quote the Yukon, because I know that would be of interest to this committee, a licensed LP and a licensed retail cannabis can operate on the same premises. It's not clear if it 100% allows for Farmgate. I'm waiting for them to clarify their regulations, but it sounds like they're working on it, the same as other jurisdictions are working on farm gate. So farm gate allows us also, when people are in the building, it allows us to market a little bit. Under the Federal Cannabis Act, marketing for cannabis products is very prohibitive. There's not a lot of things that we can do that other companies can do. At the beginning of this meeting, we were even worried about us wearing these sweaters and stuff. So when people do get into our building, we give an opportunity for them to meet with our master grower, to ask any questions, provide education on cannabis, hopefully reduce the stigma of cannabis, and to tell our story. And we find that when we tell our story, people are interested. We know people in the north 100% like to support local, which is important to us. And Farmgate would allow us, people in the building, make some sales from the stuff that we grow, cultivate, and manufacture, and maybe even some swag sales from some of the gear that we have there. Not a big change for us, but something that would really help our bottom line. The next, go back to that last slide, please. Sorry, Owen. The next bullet on there would be samples to retailers. And why do we care about this? What does it mean? So currently under the local NWT Cannabis Products Act and regulations, local producers such as us are not allowed to provide samples to retailers, so to the stores in town that sell cannabis. It's prohibited currently. Unfortunately, we know Southern LPs are doing this. We know they're coming into town, providing off their swag, providing samples of their actual product that they've grown. And it's good business practice to do that. If we were allowed to do that, we'd also like to do it. One of our competitive advantages is the freshness of our product and the local delivery time. If we can have something that came off a stem and have it in the hands of a bud tender locally or in Fort Smith or in Simpson or in Norman Wells, we know that that bud tender would probably promote our product versus a competitor. So that's important to us. When I was in Ontario earlier this summer, where samples to retailers are allowed, I brought samples with me, and it gave me the opportunity to tell our story. We're such a small piece of the Ontario market, probably less than 1% of the stores. But when you get an opportunity for 10 to 15 minutes to talk to the person that actually buys the stuff and tell them our story about it's two brothers and myself, built a facility from scratch. We're not a big franchise like some of the Tilrays and the big conglomerates. We mop, we package, we make labels, we stick labels on things. When they hear that story, it really resonates, and it gives them the chance to have, if I'm picking these two SKUs and one's a local guy and one's a smaller player, sometimes they'll pick the smaller player because I think people like to hear that story, and I think that resonates with the people that actually order the products. So by allowing us to provide samples locally, it really helps us compete with the southern players. Right now, we know our price points have to be competitive, otherwise we wouldn't be able to sell, so we're on par price-wise. But providing samples to the bartenders that change over pretty frequently in all the 6 retail stores in the Northwest Territories would help us. And like I said, it happens in other jurisdictions. We can send samples to Saskatchewan to stores. We can deal directly in Saskatchewan with mom-and-pop stores, send a thank you card, send our story with samples. None of it allows for samples. Yukon allows for samples. BC allows for samples, and for smart reasons. I mean, these provinces and territories understand it. They understand the game. They've modernized their regulations and made it happen, which is important to us. The second to last bullet on what change we're requesting and is needed would be local delivery. And this isn't a hill for us to die on because currently we can't provide or sell online. But for some of the retail stores across the territories, this would be an economic driver. It'd be no different from DoorDash or Skip the Dishes, where people can have delivery from retail stores to their house. Obviously, IDs, checks, and things like that would have to happen. It occurs already in other jurisdictions, so the blueprint is out there. If the NWT is worried about being the first to do it, which I feel like they are in some different areas. But the jobs created from local delivery, I couldn't put a number on it, but there would obviously have to be jobs. The retail stores would have to apply new staff, economic drivers of interest to this committee, so that would be another bullet that would be of benefit not only to us, but to all the retail stores across the Northwest Territories. The last bullet is kind of a big picture wish. There isn't a lot of precedent for cannabis lounges across Canada. There are provinces that are working on it. I think I read the other day that the Ontario Chamber of Commerce is pushing the Ontario government to say, why not this? There's lounges for everything else. There's lounges for alcohol, which are called bars. It would be no different for a cannabis lounge. Similar to that build, this committee understands what goes with it. So you're going to have possibly new builds. You're going to have new staff. We understand that the change would take time for how it actually gets administered. But I think that piece would be nice for us to be a leader in and not to follow other provinces and territories to say, let's wait for someone else to do it. copy the blueprint, see what the regulations they've drafted. It'd be nice for us to be first in one of these areas. And just briefly on the tourism piece, I want to reiterate that. So for Farmgate, the secondary economy, which tourism is very important, and the committee once again understands that, we would be able to bring in probably another 1 to 2 staff if we were allowed to do Farmgate. So that's a creation of, in addition to the 7 jobs which Jordan and I have already created since 2 years of inception, plus part-time employees. Farmgate would allow us probably for a full-time tour guide, or for lack of a better word, whatever that person would do, to bring through either Aurora tourists or any other tourists that are in town, and then someone else to set the table. So we need to have things set up similar to what committee saw with our pre-roll machine, so things are ready to go. So when tourists do come in, there's stuff to see. So I think that's an important piece to consider once if this committee does recommend Farmgate to the respective minister or not, that the benefits to the secondary tourism industry are there.
If I speak on that, there's a lot of provinces. There's a couple provinces in the country and other places like where I'm from, New Zealand. There's basically an economy based around like wine tastings and vineyards in those areas. There's a lot of similarities into that. There's a lot of, there's towns in BC that are known for their cannabis, and there's literally a cannabis tourism culture there, and it's basically revolves around the product and being able to experience it. To have people come into our facility, similar to a wine tasting, where you can talk to the growers and sample the product there. It's a real thing, and it can catch on, and it is wanted. It's a smaller part of the market, but it's definitely, it's real, and it does happen, and it could be created here, and it could be really, it's a small town. It doesn't take much to inject a little bit of energy into it, and I think that's one thing that is very real, or potentially very real, and it could happen if it's allowed.
Next slide, please. So I guess the call to action, because we have a few minutes left, and how this committee can help us, is we have a petition that hopefully somebody can endorse and table at the appropriate time. I think the next setting is October. And the background of the petition is me and Jordan, as owners, ran a booth of Folk on the Rocks, hot in the sun, probably 4 or 5 hours. You don't sell a lot of hoodies when it's plus 25, but you sell a lot of t-shirts. And briefly, the petition was just asking people for, first of all, a lot of questions. So people at the Folk on the Rocks were of interest to say, where can we buy your stuff? And unfortunately, it's hard to explain to people there that you can't. And they're saying, well, you can buy alcohol here and you can smoke cannabis in this little area. Why can't you buy it? We don't have the answer. We said that government decides where and when you can sell. But our question was more of Farmgate. And people were really interested in helping out us get Farmgate. And we had a booth for 4 hours, hot under the sun, and we probably had 100 signatures in 4 hours, which was, to me, I know petitions don't carry a lot of weight, but it's important that people understand that there is support for us if that's a box that needs to be checked, to include that in the recommendations to the respective minister. So one call to action would be to help us support this petition and move it forward. And then in closing, I think the Act needs to be modernized. Since 2018, there's been no change. Like I said earlier, we should be leading in this area from an economic development perspective, not playing catch up to what other jurisdictions are already doing. It's important for GNVT and the Northwest Territories to be front. Let's be a leader in one of these pieces first. I believe the bullets that we're asking for, the changes, they're not monumental, and we understand they will take time. That's why I asked back in November 22 to get the ball rolling and to start it. We hope the committee recommends these changes and helps a small business prosper and grow from an economic development perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, and we'll be happy to take questions at the minister's purview, or chair's purview.
Excellent, thank you. Committee, the floor is yours. Who wants to start off questions this morning? Mr. Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank our presenters for the opportunity to comment and come here today, obviously. And the other thing is I'd like to say I appreciated visiting the manufacturer plant, your facility. I think it's really interesting, if not beyond, I'd almost go innovative. Now, is it innovative in the industry? That I don't know, but I can certainly say it's innovative in the sense of what you normally see here in the Northwest Territories. So it was kind of neat to see something completely different in the sense of generating opportunity, putting money into the community, employment, and even just some general excitement. I think that I think the changes that you're proposing are really interesting, and I mean, it's funny. I think there's still maybe a question here first, which is, although I don't share this perspective, so I want to start off that way, but I can appreciate that there's still some hangover, some social stigmas on the industries. And do you find, from your perspective of producers and sellers of the product, that you're still confronting this? Because I mean, ultimately, up until recently, this was an illegal product, although we all know how, it was commonplace most places. And are you finding, because I mean, when you're making the pitch and you're hoping that we'll carry forward, and I'm very interested in your initiatives, by the way, we have to look at it in the context of we're following a similar path as alcohol, and so are you asking for things that are unreasonable or out of stride for alcohol? And it sounds like you're asking for similar opportunities that already exist in other areas. And so that's kind of what I'm getting back to, is that are you finding there's still a social stigma challenge or other types of oppositions that hold the industry back, or just hold it, shh, we do this, people whisper, even though it's legal? So I'm just curious on your perspective from that part, just to get the conversation moving. So, through the chair.
Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, there's a question. Yeah, without a doubt, there is a stigma still attached. It's pretty strong, actually. Obviously, there's parts of the population that don't, sort of follow that stigma, but without a doubt, there's a huge percent of the population that still almost sees it as an illegal negative thing. Obviously the law has changed. It is legal, without a doubt, but yeah, there's still a sort of a hangover, I believe, and we are sort of fighting that, I guess, in a lot of different little areas as we go, with the public, with regulations, everything. Yeah, it's real, very strong, actually. It's changing very quickly, but it's still there, without a doubt.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to address the other questions from YK Center MLA, what we're asking for is not already there with alcohol. Like, this is nothing new. Having a sample in a retail store is no different from going to a liquor store and having a sample there. It's even the liquor store is even, you're allowed to consume it on premise. So there's nothing different from what alcohol already is in the small asks that we're looking for. In addition, the social stigma and the piece of that, if you ask any ER doc right now what more problems are for communities, smaller communities, bigger communities, any community in our NBT, I think they're going to answer alcohol. Inuvik Boot Lake understands this. I'm not saying cannabis is better. I'm just saying that there's less issues, I think, with cannabis more prevalent. I think some of the EPI studies will tell you that from the Department of Health. But once again, to answer the question, we're not looking for anything radical or different. This stuff is already happening. It's just something to be on par with other jurisdictions and what the NBT currently is providing for under the Liquor Act. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Hawkins, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you. I appreciate the answer from both of you, like your perspectives, and the changes requested. I mean, we'll have to look into a little further, and we'll also have to hear from the minister. And I'm curious and my question more is going to be framed around what direct feedback from your perspective of, other than it's not in the Act, did they have anything more substantial? Because what you've presented as suggestions and options to advance the opportunities here, actually, I don't think are that radical, really. I mean, it's, can you sell product at your producer? Can you provide samples? Can you... I mean, I can see the local delivery one a challenge, but that said, we allowed DoorDash form during COVID, so, it just... things have changed, and can we change and respond with them? And I always hate the thought when someone says, well, let's find out what other jurisdiction is doing. I've always hated that, and because, I mean, people enter politics to initiate change, hopefully for better. Not saying we always get better, but hopefully for better. And we find we spend all our time talking about, well, what is somebody else doing? And these aren't that innovative, but yet it may be innovative for us, and I'm not sure why. So ultimately, Mr. Chairman, my question is, and I just wanted to frame it up because I probably won't have an end comment, but I will say I'm certainly supportive of these changes, and I'll certainly like to hear what committee has to say, and certainly what the minister has to say. But I was just going back to the question specifically to Mr. Healy, or because I think you spoke to this about addressing the minister stuff directly. You know, was, other than it not being in the act, was there anything else, say, objecting to this? So, as you know, with your experience, there's structural change to laws, which is if there's not that special word in there, it stops everything. I guess, was there any other opposition other than says the law doesn't allow it, and I'm just going to stop there, rather than no, the law doesn't allow it, and there's no interest at the time, or there's no problem. So I'm curious on the feedback you would have gotten. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boreal Cultivation.
Chair, and thank you for the question. So some of the feedback from the questions posed would be, like I mentioned earlier, it's the change isn't happening now because it's not part of the legislative agenda, so you guys understand how that works. Staffing, we don't have enough staffing to either draft the regulatory changes or to move the legislative proposal forward. Or we have to wait for new government. We're in blackout period, which is a funny verb that I used to use as well, and we can't make any change during blackout periods, so we need to wait for new government. So when you put all these pieces together of waiting for new government, blackout period, staffing, legislative agenda, and the time it takes to create that, you got to plan for things almost 2.5 years in advance to make any change, which is unfortunate because I did start that, and I knew the process, and I started that in November 2022. So when you ask and hopefully this committee will ask the minister that today, is why can't we make this change? If it's one simple word, let's do it. Do we really need to go out for community engagement for one simple word that needs to change in order to allow special occasion permits? I would argue you don't need to. The Act's been there since 2018. I'm not a legislative drafter, but I would say add the word to it, make it consistent with the legislative act, with the Liquor Act, excuse me. And I mean, if the opposition says we don't want these changes, well, that's why the plebiscite was built into the regulations, into the Act. Communities don't have to endorse this. They don't have to move forward with any of these small changes that we're asking for. That's why that word is in there. That's why plebiscite was included when the Act was drafted in 2018, to allow for communities that aren't interested in these small changes to oppose it. So we're not forcing it upon anyone. We're making small changes that will help grow from an economic development perspective. And I'd be interested too in what the minister responds with on why these changes can't happen now. If the legislative agenda is packed, that's probably one of the reasons or excuses that will be said, but this committee can make that change in the recommendation, and ultimately my MLA and minister hopefully can endorse that, which is one and the same. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Opportunity for other members to ask questions. Do we have questions from the floor or online? Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Mr. Healy, Mr. Harker for presenting this morning. It is an interesting one, and I'll just pick up first on the comment you made where one word, you know, it's not a big change. It can be a bit of a substantial change from a community perspective. This one is kind of interesting, as you said. There is some social stigma still attached to it, obviously, and you alluded to that in your comments. We're elected to represent the people. You're going to have people in your riding that are opposed based on the social stigma. You're going to have people that are supportive, both from a medicinal and recreational point of view for marijuana. I try to take that hat, take the approach that it's legal. It's a business. You guys are entrepreneurs, which, as everybody in this room and around, everybody who knows me know that I'm a pro-entrepreneur and certainly, the only business that seems to be growing in the Northwest Territories in the last 4 years is government. So any kind of manufacturing or any kind of business that starts up, I think, is a positive. I'll get to a question. Sorry, Mr. Chair. If out of the 5 things that you have presented today, which would you say is either your biggest challenge or your biggest ask in those 5? It sounds like it could be farm gate, but is it which one would be the most beneficial to growing your business right now? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Boreal.
I'd say that the farm gate for us is not specifically beneficial directly to us, but I think Farmgate would have a lot of power in removing the stigma and good and positive for the cannabis market and landscape in the NWT. I think it would be powerful that way. I think it's probably the most powerful one. Like I was saying before, I actually think it could create a bit of a little tourism. it could go really well with hand in hand with tourism companies, and the cannabis tourism is a real thing. It's growing in some areas that have allowed it, or that are sort of naturally accustomed to it. The growing areas, it's real. It's growing now, and it's existing already. I think the farm gate could really help us, but more so the cannabis market in the Northwest Territories.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you. On the media, Mr. Chair, media in the last few years have talked about production and the availability to produce, I guess, what's required to keep the business sustainable and meet any market demand that's out there as you grow. How are you addressing those concerns, or have they been addressed? Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Healy, and just for the benefit of people online, just wait for the light to come on when you start speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as meeting demand, our Boreal's problem has been not being able to meet the demand of Ontario, basically. We are selling all of our product that we are growing. Our problem was that we didn't have enough equipment to grow enough cannabis to become profitable. So Ontario is purchasing all of our flower, and we are actually allotting some of our product to stay in NWT or certain jurisdictions just so we can actually give them some, because we're here and we want, obviously, to supporting the local economy is huge to us, is everything. But at the same time too, Ontario wants our product. So obviously we'd be crazy not to give them as much as we possibly can. So yeah, we're selling all of our product. Our problem is that we didn't have the equipment to grow enough cannabis to support our business financially right from the get-go. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Healy has a bit further comment.
Yeah, in addition to what Jordan said, we want to thank the ITI, so the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment has really allowed us to grow and provided grants for us to get that equipment, the lights, racks, tubs, to allow us to support that appetite that Ontario has. So as Jordan said in his first slide, we're in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Yukon, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and demand in Ontario, we're 1% of Ontario's stores, so to grow in Ontario is part of our success, and we know if we can get into 2% of those stores, it's massive for us. When I was doing tours in the Toronto area near York, people didn't know of us because we're such a small fish in a big pond. We're against so much competition there, but our product speaks for itself when they do get it. A lot of the feedback from the Reddit community and direct feedback from our packaging and our contact info and packaging tells us our product is popular there, so we know we need to keep substantiating and providing SKUs, so individual products in Ontario to continue to grow. So ITI has helped us get there, and as you guys saw on the tour, the rooms are there. Now we need to populate the rooms a little bit more to continue to grow in Ontario while meeting the smaller demand in the other areas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have Ms. Reid online next for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters for your presentation, and also again for taking us through your facility earlier this week. It was very illuminating. One of the things you mentioned on our tour was that you are not currently qualified as a northern manufacturer. Can you speak to the benefits of how that would help your business grow? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Over to Boreal Cultivation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question to Ms. Reid. So Boreal Cultivation, I'll start from the beginning, is we're BIPT, so we're recognized under the Business Incentive Policy under the Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment for no other reason than being BIPT. We don't get any contractual discount. The Northwest Territory Liquor and Cannabis Commission is an arms agency outside the GMT. I'd argue that, but they don't procure contracts that would allow us to get a BIP discount. So that's a full stop. We're BIPT for the sake of being BIPT. We're a local manufacturer. We recognize the importance of being BIPT and having our name on the list. To answer the member's question on manufacturing, so long story short, we're not currently recognized as a manufacturer in the Northwest Territories under the current definition of manufacturing through the Department of Industry, Tour and Investment. The department has a strategy. They've had a strategy. They've been looking at the definition in partnership with the Northern Manufacturing Association. We provided what we deem to be a qualified definition of manufacturing as what we do in July of 2023. The department is reviewing those definitions and the feedback from the NGO as well as us. And we're waiting to hear what the new definition of manufacturing is in the Northwest Territories. Because if we're not manufacturing, I don't know what we're doing. Committee was on a tour in our building, and if you saw something in one room that looked the same as something in the other room, I'd be surprised. We're taking something and substantially changing what it is from the inception to the end packaging stage, which you guys saw in the last room. Things that are being grown. We're not putting trees in packages. We're putting finished product that have been trimmed, manicured, and gone through many steps of manufacturing. The importance of being recognized as a manufacturer, not only from a marketing perspective, we're one of the only pieces that is manufactured that leaves the Northwest Territories, and that should be important to this government. Besides the joke I always use, Bullock's salad dressing, what else is getting manufactured here and being sent out to Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nunavut, and Yukon? So we're manufacturing products, we're sending them out, we're putting the Northwest Territories on the map as a manufacturer, and that secondary economy, as Mr. Bullock recognized, government can't continue to grow. You need manufacturing sectors. So for us to be recognized as a manufacturer isn't to get a manufacturing discount, because it really doesn't really help us. The government's not procuring manufacturing products from us. They're not asking us to provide them with something that's manufactured. We don't put a label on something that says GNMT manufactured. They don't have that program anymore. Made in MT would be beneficial. And in addition, there's not a lot of exporting dollars for us to manufacture. Like we said on the tour, if we were to export internationally, there is support from the federal government, but to export locally, and locally I mean by Canada, there's not a lot of support for us to export things that are manufactured in the NBT to other provinces. Some provinces help with shipping. Yukon pays for us to ship stuff to them, so does Nunavut. But at the other provinces that we're in, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, we pay the shipping ourselves for locally manufactured goods. I'm not sure if that answers the MLA's question, but it's important for us to be recognized as a local manufacturer, because that's what we do.
Thank you. Ms. Reid, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Damien, for that. Yeah, I do want to focus a little bit on export of your product within Canada and internationally, as you know, simply because some of what we were talking about earlier, and although we have been joined by Ms. Waylon Armstrong from the Cleveland region, Montfouille, I want to be very mindful of the fact that the MLAs in the room are either from Yellowknife or a larger regional center, and as we've noted in our conversation today, sometimes smaller communities are not interested in joining either liquor or cannabis, having that in their communities. So to grow your business, I see it as being export as being extremely crucial. So anything that you would like to elaborate on benefits that you are looking for from legislative changes, or how committee can support you on exporting your product, would be greatly helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boreal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I can speak for international export. That market is becoming very, very real, and it's growing really fast. Countries in Europe are decriminalizing cannabis use and working on framework to legalize it. And in the meantime, they are now importing cannabis from other countries where it is legally produced. It's huge. I'd say at least 3 to 4 times a month, Boreal's getting calls from European exporters to actually export their product to Europe. That's huge. I don't know too many companies that would be getting calls from Europe and NWT to ask for their product to be shipped overseas. It's real. The potential is huge. Any help, obviously, that there's licensing and certification that would need to take place. Europe has the European Union and other countries have sort of a more stringent shipping and protocol through their SOPs to get the product over. These are certifications that we would need to get. They're pretty pricey. Anything that would help along that way, if the NWT government was seriously interested in NWT export, a producer exporting their product to Europe, then anything would help that way as far as certification and anything that would need, any steps that would need to be taken to get that certification would be a huge help, make it more real for us. That would be international export. Damien can probably speak to domestic exporting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, to speak to domestic, when I mean domestic, within Canada, so part of my job at the production facility is to provide offerings to other jurisdictions. And what I mean by that is, in Manitoba, which is a fairly slick system, they have our offerings listed for all the retailers in the province to pick from. So how it works is, I'll get a PO cut and they'll say, Damien, please send 3 cases of X. We have to meet that commitment within 20 days. There's different models in different provinces. Ontario is a beast. It's logistical nightmare because we have to have something arrive within the hour at their docking station in Mississauga. So to work backwards from when we're growing plants to packaging, trimming, to shipping, all those pieces, we really have to juggle it to make sure we meet that quota. Ontario has huge demand. They can punt us if we don't meet those logistical criteria. So to increase our export potential within Canada, how this committee could help, I mean, think big picture and say if things are manufactured in the NBT, they qualify for X grant. ITI has small grants. They have grants through the feds as well that help local agriculture, Canadian agriculture producer grants. But for the small manufacturers that are exporting within Canada, help them out a little bit. Say we'll give you X amount of dollars per shipping. I mean, that sounds small, but to get things through Ontario is not cheap, whether it's by truck or however else we ship it. So help us out a little bit. Domestic export would go a long way to reduce some of our overhead costs that include shipping. I think that would help. There's also other markets for us to look to expand to get into. So the markets that we're in now have accepted us. We didn't include BC on that market. BC is a super competitive market to get into. Their basic answer was come back when you guys have more flower because you have to meet certain quotas to stay in BC. It's a super competitive piece. Some of the other jurisdictions like Newfoundland do calls. Quebec tends to stick to their own. So if you want to get into Quebec and you're not a local producer, it's very tricky. They look after their own producers first, which is important, and I respect that. So other jurisdictions we have looked to get into, we need to kind of have the grow to set up to get into those jurisdictions. And once we are in those jurisdictions, any support from this committee and this government for exporting potential would be of benefit to us. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the member for the question.
Thank you. I do note that Ms. Whalen Armstrong has joined us online. For round 1, do you have any questions, Emily Whalen Armstrong?
Not at this time, but maybe for the round 2, I will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So going on to round 2, Mr. Hawkins, do you have another set of questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was looking up the difference between producer and manufacturers, and it says when production converts into its immediate final output of services, it can be viewed with or without machinery, but manufacturing, as we're talking about here, produces or transforms raw material into finished goods. I mean, it's by developing various sequences, processes, labor, and machinery. I mean, that pretty much says exactly what you do there. From seeds to it growing as a plant to it being stripped and then made into final products. It seems like everything. I'm not sure what the hurdle is. As an anecdote, not intended as a long story, there's a little bit of a joke, which is they say, why are speaking nationally, that is, they go, why are conservatives the best in the economy, in the sense of governance, and people go, well, they're the same, aren't they? And they go, well, they're the best because they tell everyone they're the best. And I would almost say to you that maybe it's time you start calling yourself a manufacturer as well, so producer / manufacturer. Maybe everyone else will figure it out too on their own. So sometimes you need to lead by leading, by just getting people out of your way, because those cause problems. So specifically to your challenges here, can you contextualize your northern growth that this could equate to? Like, could you put some sense behind it? I'm not looking for corporate secrets, so please don't feel that I'm asking, this is going to help our bottom line by, say, $1.2 million, starting in 3 weeks. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more, just a broader concept of how this business change would help your business in the north. And you did point out that you see tourism. You pointed out that potentially 1.5 employees. I'm just curious on how far this will change in your sales, in the sense, would this support other types of businesses, just tourism, or even just at your shop? I'm just curious on how far this will expand, because I mean, sometimes we have to understand how important a linchpin change can mean, and I'm just wondering if you see it also benefiting other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that there's sort of twofold. You kind of touched on both of them. Obviously, a lot of these ones would help our just sales in general. I mentioned stuff like farm gate and SOP, special location permits. Instantly allowing those gets rid of stigma. Having those things in place creates stigma, or it keeps the stigma going. Once I believe that that stigma is gone, that helps a lot of different areas. It helps the retail. The retail is making money off the sale of cannabis. So obviously it helps retail. It would help us, and it helps the cannabis market. And when I say that, I mean the people's view on cannabis and how they interact with cannabis. It changes that, and that trickles down to not just us. Yeah, I hope I answered the question there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawkins, you have a follow-up? Just noting that we are quickly running out of time, so if we can just keep our preambles to a minimum so everyone can get their questions in. Thanks.
No problem. Are you able to contextualize to some degree the size of your market in the NWT versus your export market? Because we've spent a lot of time talking about Ontario and other types of regions, which is great from a manufacturing and producing point of view. Can you give us a sense on basically your size of your sales market here versus elsewhere? Because I mean, we're talking about what's holding it back here, so I'm curious on the dynamics of how that may change. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we are selling locally. The NWT has been a huge part of our sales. Without them, we'd be non-existent. There's definitely room for growth. A big part of that too would be retail opening up in communities that haven't been yet. I know that there's been a lot of talk in Inuvik about retail. There's been there's definitely some pushback from the community. I believe that again, whether that's stigma or just personal preference, I'm not quite sure. But obviously, again, I go back to sort of getting rid of that stigma. If that stigma goes away and then their education is sort of put forth and developing, as there's not a lot of money. It was illegal a few years ago, so there wasn't very much education and put towards it. I think that it is changing, and it'll take some time. There's a lag time there. But retail opening up in these communities would be huge. There's communities that have a half-decent population that do not have cannabis retail, and so the black market exists there. There's not too many areas in the world where I believe as strongly that literally the black market could be absolutely eradicated by a retail store. I've been up to Inuvik. I grew up here. I've purchased cannabis back in the day, in the dark days, in the before days. I know what is there. I know what exists, and the legal prices are much cheaper. This is huge. Like, it could literally eradicate the black market. So these opening up, which would create more sales in the legal market by us. That, I think, is the strongest thing that could happen as far as affecting the bottom line of the NWT cannabis market and sales for us. All of these things would help us. Nothing's, like Damien said, nothing is, farm gate and these special occasion permits, they're not money makers for us generally. They'll bring some income in, but it's more to support the industry itself. And I think once that industry is supported, then stuff starts flowing in afterwards. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers, I have you up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I'm kind of the same lines as Mr. Hawkins, so I don't, but I mean, you started in 2019. Obviously, you guys are true entrepreneurs. As we did the tour, very professional, very clean. I was quite impressed. I'd never been to a facility like that before. And as you said, you guys do the mopping, the cleaning, the taking out the trash, and soup to nuts, so to speak, and there you do. So that's great. So you received some funding from ITI to expand your production. Now these are you have the 5 requests that you're coming back to the government for. I guess, I mean, obviously you guys are obviously bright enough. You do have a long-term plan, like the long-term business plan. The viability of your organization with or without these changes, with these changes, are you now? I mean, I get it. You're a fledgling business for all things being equal. So, and we spoke about this a little on the tour, I know, but just for the record, like where you started in 2019, where you are now, where you see yourself going in the next 3 to 5 years based on your new facility expansion, as well as some potential changes here from an economic dev point of view, employees, kind of viability and long-term sustainable viability for your company. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boreal.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We sort of touched on it, like you said in the tour. Our problem at right at the offset was that we didn't have enough product, or the means to produce enough product to, make some money every month. ITI has lent us, had to give some grant money for a build out of 2 flower rooms. These flower rooms will increase our yield by 350 to 400%. That puts us in a profitable position. Now the challenge becomes selling that product. We feel that isn't nearly as much of a problem as trying to get money to get the equipment to grow the cannabis. Our sales have been strong in Ontario. Ontario is always wanting more than we've given them, where there's lost sales opportunity there for the past 8 months with them to a year. So with this build out from ITI, the money, we are in a position where we now can produce enough cannabis to be in a profit position. That's huge. Then it's a matter of just building our sales. So things like the bullets that we've put forth are now things that help us sell the rest of the product that we have from the build out money that we've got. We will, because of this build out, like I said, our increased yield, we'll have to have another 2 to 3 employees now to manage the extra product that we are now growing. It also now puts us in a position where we may have extra cannabis that we actually could now talk to international exporters that have been chasing us for our product. Now we've just sort of been turning them away because we don't have enough. But now this puts us in a position where maybe we can now look at entering that market. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess then is it fair to say that our government has given you the opportunity to expand your business, and now what you're looking for is some changes to legislation for our government to continue to now allow you to take that seed money, if you will, the grant money, and now expand that business further by taking down some of the barriers to allow you to get your product to market. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boreal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That is very accurate. What you just said is very accurate. The ITI has put us in a position through grant money to allow us to be in a profit position. It's huge for us, and now it's a matter of, now that we are in that position to try and get any little advantages that we can that we believe are well within reason. We're seeing it in other parts of the country, or other producers are doing it. ITI's help has helped us massive, and it puts us in a really good position to move forward and be pretty profitable.
Thank you. Ms. Whalen Armstrong, I have you next on the list for questions.
Okay, I do apologize for missing part of the part of the presentation, but I just wanted to ask if Indigenous government were approached to partner, because I know that in small communities, there's a lot of concerns, especially with the black market. So I just wanted to ask, that's just my questions. One question is that if Indigenous government were approached, or if they did approach the Indigenous government to partner. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Boreal.
Thank you for the question. So if the question is approached in term to partner as an investor or as a partner to make changes to government, I can answer both because I'm not sure which one. No to the first one. We haven't approached any Indigenous governments for investor opportunities. If the second question is approaching Indigenous governments to get community support and to maybe to have retail within their communities, we have had discussions with the Gwich'in Tribal Council to see how we can help them provide retail in Nunavik. So that has been discussions that we've exercised. And then in follow-up, we understand and respect the community's perspective on cannabis within their communities. We know that there's a black market of cannabis in communities, and we're here to try and provide safe, laboratory-tested cannabis. And in addition, we respect the plebiscite that's built into the Act for the communities that don't wish to have that product within their communities. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Whalen Armstrong, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, that's what I was. It was towards investment. So no, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that is good timing because I note that we have the minister coming in a few minutes. So we have run out of time for committee to ask questions. Not to say that we can't follow up after the meeting, but I did want to thank Boreal for taking the time to come and present to committee, taking the time to tour committee through your facility earlier this week. Similar to other members, I found the tour really enlightening and interesting, and just wanted to say, you know, as a person in the NWT, it's not often that you see, or we haven't often seen manufacturing occurring in the NWT, and I don't care about the definition. It looked like manufacturing to me, and it's I don't know, I thought it was exciting. You know, we see a business creating jobs, doing something new that wasn't being done before, in a place where it can be difficult to do business, and so it was really exciting to see that, and I'm definitely excited to see it. And I think when I think about this, it's not so much about whether or not we like cannabis, whether or not you agree with it in that sense, but this is a legal product that is being produced all across the country now, and why wouldn't NWT want to be a part of this? Why wouldn't NWT want job creation happening? So those are just some thoughts I wanted to put out there since I didn't get a chance to ask questions, but thanks very much to Boreal for taking the time, and we'll take a quick pause to bring the minister and her staff in, and certainly you guys, this is a public meeting, so you're welcome to stick around and listen to what the minister has to say. Okay, thanks everyone. Welcome back. The committee will now receive a presentation from the Honourable Minister of Finance, Carolyn Wozniak, and officials from the Department of Finance. As always, just want to remind everyone, direct your comments through the chair so we can have a nice smooth meeting and so the audio-visual folks can keep up. I'll now pass it on to Minister Carolyn Wozniak. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having us here. Joining me this morning on my right, Deputy Minister of Finance Bill McKay, the Deputy Secretary to the Financial Management Board at the far left, Mandy Bolstad. I'm not going to get your title right. Okay, Todd Sasaki, Manager of Public Affairs and Communications. Also in the room with us this morning, my Ministerial Special Advisor, Drew Robertson, and Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister of Finance, Nora Russell. We are here at the request of committee to brief you on how cannabis is currently regulated and legislated in the Northwest Territories, as well as some information on how our efforts compare to those of other Canadian jurisdictions as part of the statutory review of the Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Implementation Act. Cannabis became legal in the Northwest Territories October 17th, 2018, following the coming into force of the Federal Cannabis Act. In preparation, the Northwest Territories passed the Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Implementation Act. designating the Northwest Territory Liquor and Cannabis Commission, or the NTLCC, as the distributor for cannabis to ensure Northwest Territories residents had safe and legal access. The territorial framework established strict rules on where cannabis could be consumed, mirroring existing tobacco regulations and prohibiting use in public spaces. Local governments were empowered to impose further restrictions on or bans on cannabis use in their communities. Since legalization, the government of the Northwest Territories has focused on public education and ensuring safe cannabis distribution and consumption. The Territory has seen a steady rise in cannabis sales, reflecting both the increased availability and the effectiveness of its regulatory measures. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask the Deputy Minister to lead us through a brief presentation, and of course, we will then be happy to answer questions thereafter.
Go ahead, Mr. Deputy Minister.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, all right. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Conscious of time, I will go fairly quickly through these slides. The Minister already kind of outlined some of these things in her opening remarks, so you'll be aware of some of the background here. So just up on the first slide is a timeline which outlines when cannabis became legal, and then in 2019 the Cannabis Products Act and regulations were amended to legalize edible cannabis products. So that's kind of a timeline of the legalization of cannabis and changes to the act that have been done since it was legalized. And so I'll just leave that there for a second. All right, so the Cannabis Products Act this is an outline of the Cannabis Products Act, and it outlines certain parameters of how cannabis can be used. So there's certain requirements, like the minimum age is set out. It's the same as the drinking age, 19. There are also possession limits within the Act. There also allow for personal cultivation and sets parameters around that. It also regulates retail and distribution of cannabis, so that is also an important part of cannabis legalization and regulation. Sets out consumption restrictions, which are within the Act, and then it touches on impaired driving, and then finally workplace safety. So that's the general outline of the Cannabis Products Act, which I think MLAs are probably familiar with. Is it moving? So there are also regulations that were promulgated under the statute. So they outline in more detail some of the requirements for the distribution of and sale of cannabis. So there's a section on vendor designation, cannabis stores, transportation, temporary prohibition orders, possession of cannabis in prohibited or restricted areas, and then finally inspections and enforcement. Okay. Oh, just okay. So there are specific issues which have arisen since we passed the statute and enacted the regulations, and those we're just going to touch on here, and we can discuss them further as part of the questions from MLAs. But first is farm gate sales. So a farm gate retail option is something that is considered in other jurisdictions. It's an option where a shop allows a licensed producer to sell their product directly to the facility. So just the same as how breweries might sell off sales on their location or something like that. So that's farm gate sales. The next one is product samples. So there's consideration for producers and retailers to provide product samples, as they might with alcohol. So that's something else that has been that has arisen as an issue within the space of cannabis regulation. And then finally, special occasion permits. So right now there is allowance for people to get special occasion permits to allow them to sell alcohol at special occasion for a specific purpose, but that does not exist right now in the Cannabis Products Act. So the chart here, Mr. Chair, just outlines for members these three issues, how they're, if they've been dealt with by different jurisdictions. So right now, farm gate sales are allowed in British Columbia, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. Product samples are allowed in a number of jurisdictions as well. And then special occasion permits, or none are currently allowed, but there are there is movement in some jurisdictions, in particular Ontario, British Columbia, and Manitoba, where they're considering allowing special occasion permits. So when cannabis was legalized in October of 2018, you might recall it was only available through the NTLCC approved liquor stores or through mail order and the online cannabis store. But since then, there's been private retailer store openings, so they outline here what the NTLCC liquor stores are, where the private retailers are, and then finally the other options. So over time, the options available to residents of the NWT to access cannabis have broadened. So you'll see, members will see here in this chart what the increased access to legal cannabis has increased sales for the NLTCC or NTLCC. So they've increased quite considerably since 2018-2019 from 1.3 million to 8.4 million. And at the same time, alcohol sales have dropped a little bit as well. So don't know if those are connected, but we thought we'd put those out there for members so they can have that comparative. And then I would just also note that this includes sales from licensed producers within the NWT. So there's one licensed producer, so that was $394,889 of the $8,437,000 that was sold in 23-24. So the $394,000 from licensed producers within the NWT, and then $68,851 of that was cannabis that was produced in the NWT. Well, this slide, Mr. Chair, is just meant to outline the, in a sort of broad scope, the support for producers and vendors that we provide. So we do have a close relationship with vendors and producers within the territory, so we do provide them regular assistance with the vendor application process, regulatory guidance. We do also provide the Northern Cannabis markup reduction, so this is a reduction to the markup that we would provide. Sorry. Okay. That we would provide to manufacturers. So so what that means is there is a markup provided that we put on cannabis. So we buy it wholesale from producers and then sell it in the retail stores, and that markup is applied to those products. But for locally produced cannabis, the markup is less. So that's a support mechanism we provide. We also have product assortment from licensed producers to sell to NWT stores. And then, as I mentioned before, we have regular meetings with producers and retailers to make sure that they're aware of the different regulatory requirements and supports that are available. And then finally, Mr. Chair, just want to outline the legislative and regulatory change across Canada. So since legalization, there have been updates to different regulations and legislation. So the Health Canada regulations were updated in 2022. And there were amendments made principally to facilitate cannabis research, streamline testing regulations, adjust public possession limits for cannabis beverages, and then there were health regulations, but they were meant to kind of adjust to the realities of cannabis consumption and the risks that are posed by cannabis consumption. And then federally, there was also a legislative review conducted between 2022 and 2024, and that expert panel report was released, and we're reviewing it now, but that has a number of recommendations within it that are made both to the federal government and to provincial and territorial governments on what was found by the legislative review. Provincial and territorial updates. So Quebec has reviewed their legislation. The only kind of significant change that they made to that was they raised the legal age for cannabis consumption from 18 to 21. So that was based on some research that suggests the impacts to youth are greater, so there should be a higher legal consumption age for cannabis. Ontario started with a government-run retail model, but after they did their review, they allowed for retail sales outside of the government system. And then British Columbia, they've started a review in 2024, so that's meant to refine this regulatory framework, make it more streamlined, user-friendly, and increase the number of licensed retail stores so they can improve access to the legal market and also reduce the use of the illegal market. So as my last slide here, I just want to outline for committee kind of where we see the future legislative and regulatory changes coming in the NWT. So first, as I mentioned, the final report of the expert panel is available to us now, so we'll be reviewing that. But I would just also note that there isn't at present any plan for a legislative proposal or a review of the Cannabis Act, but that could be put into the legislative agenda. But right now there isn't. That's not part of the legislative priorities of the 20th Legislative Assembly. We also are undertaking work to develop new liquor regulations, so that will be kind of a focus for the next little while because we have to implement the new Liquor Act that the previous Assembly approved near the end of the last government. And then if we were to undertake a review of the legislation and undertake changes to the legislation, it would probably take 2 to 3 years in terms of developing a legislative proposal. As I'm sure everybody's aware of the process, we'd have to develop a legislative proposal to be reviewed by committee, and committee came back with their thoughts on that. We would go out for public consultation, and we'd use all that information to develop a bill, which again would be reviewed by committee, and then would come back to the government for review, and then finally introduced into the Legislative Assembly. So all told, if we were to undertake that process during this Assembly, it would take probably 2 to 3 years, as I'm sure committee members are aware. So, Mr. Chair, that's the end of the presentation. We're happy to take any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Okay, I have Mr. Hawkins up first for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the presentation. As the department will be well aware, we just spoke to Boreal. They had provided a clear and succinct presentation with respect to their asks. Hearing the last piece of the presentation by the Deputy Minister got me more thinking along the lines of if some of these proposals, the 5 of them, and just for the record, I'll point them out just very quickly, which is farm gate, SOPs, sample to retailers, local delivery, and cannabis lounges. If these items have been proposed going back as far as 2022, what work and specifically on each of those suggestions has been done by the department, and are they supportive of each one of those suggestions? And if you could list them off where you are on each initiative. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a nice comprehensive question. Over to the Minister and her staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'll perhaps turn it over to the department in a moment, but this has not been, cannabis in general hasn't been on the legislative priority agenda for either the last government or this one, so that does constrain the ability of the department to undertake significant work, given that there's often a very long legislative agenda. Last government, there was work that was done to advance the Liquor Act to see that that could be amended. That was quite challenging to get that done. Now, of course, we still have to do the regulations for the Liquor Act. That was an area that had a fair bit of attention in the last government. So, but again, even then, it took a lot to do something that wasn't necessarily within the mandates. So this not being in the mandate certainly would not find itself to get the same level of attention as some other materials. And there was obviously all the different items that were listed, 5 different things, if I recall correctly. I didn't write each one down as we were going. And some of them were addressed in terms of why they are not in our legislation, and the underlying social dynamics and political dynamics. I don't know that they have changed. I'm hoping that the Deputy Minister now, with my introduction, has had a chance to pull up all 5 and can perhaps speak a little bit more on the position as we have it presently on each. Thanks.
The Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Minister is correct that we haven't done very much work on any of those. I actually only got the first three, but I can go through the information I have for those. First, farm gate sales. As Minister said, we haven't considered it, but I would note to committee that the legislative review of the Federal Cannabis Act does say that provinces and territories should consider permitting direct-to-consumer sales from smaller cultivators. So that is a recommendation within the report. So there has been, it is on our radar, although we haven't done any work on that. Special occasion permits, as I said in the presentation, those aren't allowed under the Act, so it would require a legislative change. But I would note that that there is also within the legislation, it doesn't allow cannabis at public events where there'll be children, so that's another restriction on the special occasion permit for cannabis that might not exist for alcohol. So those are kind of the two barriers to special occasion permits. For product samples, again, not on our radar at the moment, but it would require legislative changes to allow product samples. So, you know, if we undertake a legislative review, that would be part of it. And as I mentioned, I think I missed the last two, so I might turn it over to one of my colleagues here if they have any further of it.
Just for your benefit, the five that were brought forward was farm gate, special operating permits, samples to retailers, local delivery is another one, and cannabis lounges was the last.
Two more.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. To speak to the two remaining items, in terms of local retailers, again, not aware of any work done to pursue that. One additional note with respect to cannabis lounges is that it would require legislative change, not only to existing cannabis legislation, but would also require looking at the existing Tobacco Act.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawkins, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you. I've heard a lot of, all the answers are built around nothing's been done, and not angry or disappointed. You know, I see that, I hear that in a lot of government things. I'm sure that that's the reality. Let's, without wasting a lot of time, and maybe, because we have 2 questions per round, I'll just say, what are you doing to action some of these items? Because these aren't new items. Again, if I understand correctly, these were proposed back in November of 2022. And so, knowing that some of these changes are larger than others, respectfully, some of them could be done in action quite straightforward. So, you know, I'll leave it at that, and we'll start with that. So what are you doing to support some of the minor initiative changes to show that we could support the economy, the industry of a legal product, no different than we're treating alcohol? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the Minister and her staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, since 2022, the focus for us, well, there's two parts to it. And for one, with respect to making legislative changes, there was a desire to see what the federal review outcomes would be. That is now here, and as the Deputy Minister mentioned, some suggestion coming from the federal perspective that indeed direct farm gate style sales is an area that the provinces and territories should undertake themselves. There is, of course, by contrast, some suggestion coming out of there that there's also, you know, ongoing concern about ensuring that there's different types of safety associated from, you know, for young people, for instance, as compared to alcohol. So, wanting to see how this was all precipitated from the federal legislative change, and so it made sense from our view, and I believe it was communicated that we wanted to see what that federal review would be like first before undertaking significant engagement work to do a legislative proposal or review or change here in the Northwest Territories. With respect to other work that has been done, a fair bit of time has been spent in terms of trying to identify ways to support the industry directly in the form, for instance, of, you know, there's seed funding that comes from ITI, with which I think our local industry has benefited, loans from Prosper NBT, with which our local industry has benefited. and then from the markup that we apply through the NTLCC. And so a fair bit of work has gone into that, into trying to figure out a path on what that markup might be that would be hopefully one that can benefit the industry while also still maintaining an approach that is equitable considering the costs associated with managing NTLCC. That's been the focus up to this point. So how straightforward some of these changes might be, again, I think that depends on striking the balance between different interests that exist across the Northwest Territories. And while for those of us here in Yellowknife can certainly see that there's economic benefit of having a producer right here with a large facility and multiple employees, there are other voices in the territory who might not see some of these changes as necessarily being a direction they want to go. So I just want to pause. It is not maybe quite as simple as all that, but again, to the extent that there are things in just the regulations, that can be done more easily, but it still would want to be one that we would undertake only with some consideration of other perspectives from the territory. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers, I have you up next for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Minister and staff. I mean, obviously, as a government, we support manufacturing. We support any kind of an entrepreneurial, I think, business. I've mentioned before, it seems like the only businesses that seem, or industry that seems to be growing in our territory is the government, but in the past few years. And given that we do, would the minister consider, if I look at these 5 requests, if I look at, Farmgate and samples seem to be the 2 that would likely be most beneficial to grow this industry. And by growing this industry, again, continuing as a government to support this industry, looking at potential increased revenue, and would there be a consideration to at least, rather than wait 4 to 6 years to have this manufacturing company wait to be able to sell their products through Farmgate, through retail, and to be able to hand out samples to grow their industry? Is there any consideration to look at those 2 initially to maybe move that forward a little more quickly to allow this industry to grow? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the minister and her staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, I think we would have the benefit of a report from committee with respect to what the outcomes might be. So, and it may well be that some of that work of determining the balance of interests and different levels of perspective from the territory, again, we'll be very grateful to have the benefit of this report. And if it comes out that of the various options being presented of ways to amend, whether it's the Act or whether it's the regulations, if there are recommendations that come, again, from a committee that represents all the territory, that is helpful. So if there's 5 that were presented in the first question, and there's maybe 2 or 1 or 3 of those that can be the focus, that will be helpful information for us to then go back and determine, if that is a direction that the Legislative Assembly wants to go, not the Department of Finance. So, I mean, that's the thing. I can't say a yes to that right now because I'm in some ways putting the cart of the Department of Finance ahead of the Legislative Assembly horse, which is where, please tell us as the Assembly what the areas of interest are. Again, I'll just kind of reiterate, though, that to the extent that we're reopening the Act, that's more complicated. To the extent that it's the regs only, that's a little easier. The minute we're opening up the Tobacco Act too, well, again, you open it up, and I know committee knows this probably better than me, it's your area, but then there's always questions of what else can be done and what else can be changed, and hey, while you have it open, why don't you do this too? So just cautioning that sometimes saying you're going to open up and change one reg is not always as simple as all that, but again, if that's where this goes with committee, then that's direction that the government can certainly take. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, and I was part of the WSCC when the ETS, the Environmental Tobacco Smoke Strategy, came out. So understanding that, yes, to do something like a cannabis lounge would require much more, I think, thought and much more work. But again, I reiterate, we do support this industry. We have supported this industry financially both through Prosper, former BDIC, and certainly through ITI. So we do want to see this industry grow, and I do think that, at least looking at Farmgate and allowing this industry to provide samples would certainly benefit them, given that we just gave them funding to increase their production, to allow them to access markets that are wanting their product, but they didn't have the capacity to produce it, and now they will because of us, which I think is important to note. And I think that we should look at, if we are in, we're in, and that I understand there are certainly social political aspects to this industry, but I think from the two that I mentioned, the farm gate and samples, is not, I guess, a far stretch from what we're already doing. So I guess my question is then, would the minister likely agree to that statement? And obviously, that's a government decision, not a Department of Finance decision. I get that, but would the minister agree that likely those two would be the easier two to kind of knock off in a shorter term to again allow this industry to grow? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the minister and her staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, it's a well-phrased question, but I am not going to walk into that one just yet and I think in some ways members already answered why, which is the Department of Finance would bring forward a proposal. It would then have to go to Cabinet still. So I'm not going to unilaterally be in a position to speak for all of government right now. But again, look, I appreciate the clarity of purpose that is coming forward here, that the management of and the control of cannabis and liquor is a challenging one in the territory. And so to the extent that there's clarity of purpose in this space, it certainly makes it much easier for the Department of Finance to then put something together, to go back to my colleagues and to then have a position from government. So on the Farmagate one, I only note that does require legislative, like a legislative change. Samples may well be one, but on the other hand is one that seems to be supported by the federal review. The sample approach, as I've said, again, a bit of a variance across jurisdictions, but there's certainly some that are doing it and does appear to require more of a regulatory change. So putting those there in terms of to answer the question of what is easier or not, that hopefully gives a bit of a sense. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Ms. Reid up for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I had to change my audio. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the department for the presentation. Earlier, speaking to boreal cultivation, they have an interest in exporting their product at a greater scale than they're currently able to, and looking into various options for export outside of the territory to grow their business. They noted that they are not able to be considered manufacturers. I recognize too that this policy is not sitting with the Department of Finance, but maybe the minister would like to make a comment or a commitment if she would like to advocate for changes to the manufactured products policy so that cannabis producers can be registered as an approved NWT manufactured product. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Over to the minister and her staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, easily done, yes, I can certainly go to Minister Cleveland over at ITI, which is where the manufactured products policy does reside. I think there may be some interest in having that policy reviewed if that's not already underway. I think that's been an ask, and I say that only in part having not so long ago been involved with that department and recognizing that there's some challenges there. As part of the procurement review that took place largely in the last government, this was raised as being an area that could never stand to look. So I think there may be a review on the horizon there, and I'll certainly raise again with them that this is another context in which that may arise. I obviously wasn't present for the last presentation, but my recollection and my understanding of why this is a challenge is that the manufacturing definition is one that wouldn't apply. I would note, though, that the manufactured products policy is meant to benefit manufacturers in the Northwest Territories for Northwest Territories purposes. So in other words, it wouldn't necessarily benefit the fact of an export. It would benefit a manufacturer to have their products sold here. That doesn't, so it may not be the right tool to increase or support exports. There are, though, other tools that should be at our disposal, and Department of, particularly ITI, or Industry Tourism Investment, is responsible for growing exports. We don't have much of an export right now other than diamonds. So again, take a double commitment on that front to go back to my colleague and sort of ask what we're doing and what we have at our disposal, even if it's just connecting the dots to the federal government, who do have funds for small-scale exports. So, again, two in one on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Reid, do you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if my home environment is a little noisy at the moment. The reason that I understand from Boreal is the lack of recognition as a manufacturer means that they may not be able to access additional support, such as made in the NWT, and additionally some federal resources around exporting their product. So that's why I bring it up. And I guess the reason I'm fixated on export is not that I don't wish their product to be sold here in the NWT. I do. I'm glad that they're a homegrown business that is finding a good amount of success in their business. It's just I do want to be mindful of the fact that there are limitations on them in terms of how they scale to this territory, and they are very excited about export, not only domestically here in Canada, but across international fields as well. So I think if there are any opportunities that the minister has seen in her previous conversations with these producers to give them those opportunities, that's something I'm interested in hearing her speak to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you. Over to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, Mr. Chair, I'll be honest about it. The angle that being recognized under the manufactured products policy is in some ways, or the lack thereof, is creating another barrier, is not something that has been raised to me, and does certainly, that certainly, I don't think is the intention of the manufactured products policy. So let me, again, I would definitely will make that commitment that I will go back and talk to ITI, my colleague there, and also us. I mean, that's not our intention. We're well aware that a lot of the success right now that Boreal Cannabis is having is not in this jurisdiction. It's their sales elsewhere, and I think everyone in the, every one of us as members want to see successes for local businesses. So I would hope that that's not the barrier, and I'd like to go back and figure out what in fact is that barrier. If it's being under the MMPP, then again we can look at that. That's not how I understand that policy to work. So I appreciate having that raised. I appreciate hearing that, and we'll go and track down what is going on with that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Hawkins so far for round two.
Yeah, thank you. As beneficial as it is to talk about the manufacturing policy, it's not why we're here today in the context of the Department of Finance and the 5 outstanding challenges, as well as some other ones. I can appreciate how important that is, and I'm not sure the barrier is helpful for today's discussion, because really we should be talking about what the minister is interested in doing, how they're willing to action some of these items, and rather than say, for example, protecting the status quo, which is we'll review, we'll wait till others. And I'm curious, the minister said something very interesting in her last answer, I think to Mr. Rogers, which was it gave me the sense that if committee recommended action on certain items, that the department would take a look at that and, well, we'll start with that way, take some action potentially. So I guess really the clear question is if committee recommended, for example, 1, 2, 5 of these items, whatever it ends up being as a focus, be it short-term or long-term, would the minister be prepared to action them on the direction of committee? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, that's the dynamic of this building, that when MLAs or committee members raise issues, whether on the floor of the House or particularly through reports of committee, and they come to a department, that influences the department's activities and actions, just as do the priorities that are set by all 19 members influence the mandate and influence the legislative agenda. So, yes, if there's a recommendation that comes from committee to the Department of Finance to go and look at something, even if that's not necessarily what is directly in our otherwise existing mandate, well, then I take it back to cabinet and say, here's what I'm being asked to do. here's the impacts that may have on the legislative agenda. Because it's not only our policy folks who have to do some work to determine, what's the jurisdictional scan, what kind of options should we have, what would we have to open up, what we have to change. I also have to rely on the Department of Justice to actually go and do the drafting. And they might be, under the gun right now from other departments to do other things within the legislative proposals that have already gone to all 19 members. So it's, I'm sorry if the members are probably frustrated that I'm not giving a clear yes or no, because I can't. All I can say is there's a set of priorities from the Assembly. We do our best to put together a legislative agenda for the government in reflection of that. And obviously things come up. That's a reality. Yeah, so if we get a report from a committee that says, please go and do a thing, just like the Liquor Act kind of came up last government, and we were able to get it through, but only not easily. So, again, in general, legislative proposals take sort of 4 to 6 months, and in general, it can be another, year and a half for drafting it, depending on the complexity. If we're opening up an act, it's bigger. If we're opening up the regs, it's much smaller. And a lot of that depends on having the staffing. I can also tell you that we are challenged right now to have policy staff, and we're challenged with legislative drafting staff. So that is creating delays. Long answer, Mr. Chair, but I hope it was relatively comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Do you have a follow-up?
The minister didn't disappoint. How about that? Is it I'm going to have to go back and dissect it repeatedly to find out what sentence contradicts each other? The minister, in all your answers, you always balance a tightrope. Well, I'm sort of in favor, but I'm not necessarily. I'll have to review it depending on the winds. I mean, yeah, all answers end up being, holy cow, they're hard to, yeah. All right, Mr. Chairman, I don't think I have a question. I've heard the minister. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Do we have second round questions from any other members? Okay, not seeing any. Something I did want to dig into a little bit. It's not necessarily related to this act, but I know that the discount applied for local producers versus outside producers is somewhat different, and there's been a lot of discussion about changing that, whether it can be changed, whether it should be changed. I know the minister mentioned during the presentation that effectively you have to cover costs. I guess my question, just to get down to it with the minister, is why would we not put those costs onto outside producers versus local ones? If we're trying to incentivize local business, I mean, we could set the discount however we wish, effectively saying that we want southern producers to be subsidizing the NWT's production, and we'll just say we're not even going to do a markup on local. So can the minister discuss kind of where that's at and where the department's reasoning is on where they stand currently?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, this is an area that there's been a fair bit of discussions back and forth between our current existing producer here in the Northwest Territories and the Department of Finance. And the approach that the Department of Finance uses is by reducing we do reduce our profit margin on what they're from the NTLCC. So there's basically a 30% reduction in the markup that is applied to a cannabis product offered to the local producers. We reduce it so that they can then determine what their wholesale price would be. The markup gets applied, again, at a reduced rate for the Northwest Territories. They can then sell it at a resulting price. Now, they can make a choice to reduce their wholesale price such that it's being sold less than other products, or they can keep it what it is, and then their final sale price comes out differently. And I'll be very frank, Mr. Chair, there's been a lot of meetings on this because I know that the producers don't necessarily like the way that we're applying it and don't agree, and they would like to see it done differently. We have committed to go back and have a look at this. There had been a hope, I think a couple of years ago, when their facility first came online, that there'd be more sales of their product in the Northwest Territories, that we could take a bit more of a look at what the numbers look like for them and for us. And I think perhaps this is a good news story, that there's been more exporting than there has been perhaps internal sales. Just a simple reality for whatever reason, and so that that review doesn't have the data that we might have hoped for. Nonetheless, I had, I think, previously committed that we would continue to look at that. I'm still stand by that commitment. We'll continue to look at it. We're going to have FMB take another look here again. What we do in this realm is similar to what we do with respect to alcohol producers and breweries. Well, the brewery, and a fair bit of time gets put into really these two. It's two businesses, one brewery and now these ones. I also stand by what I said earlier. We do want to help support the businesses. That said, I'm not sure that there would be an appetite politically to 100% subsidize, as in take a loss on selling any kind of cannabis product in the Northwest Territories. So there is still that balance to be struck, that I don't know that we're going to bring it down to zero and take a loss. But at the same time, bringing down our markup to being quite a bit less than what it is on the non-NWT products that has been the approach to date. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate that the department's taking a look at that, and certainly would advocate that the more we can do to support local producers, the better. I mean, the point is the product's coming in from the south either way, and so really what we're talking about here is just supporting local business. To dig into the subject at hand a bit more, I mean, the department and the minister have kind of discussed the difficulty of changing legislation, the time involved. Let's say committee comes forward with some recommendations. If the recommendations are fairly targeted, and we're talking about changes which have been done in other jurisdictions, so we have a precedent that we can look to, we can even borrow language from, is it really such an onerous process to make small changes, to bring forward a bill which just changes those few things? Does it need to take years? If the minister could kind of discuss how we can potentially fast track such things and get things done quickly, I'd be definitely interested to hear about that. And can we talk about creating, I don't have a saying off the top of my head, but rather than saying why we can't, can we discuss what we can do to kind of speed things along?
Mr. Chair, let me turn that to the Deputy Minister. It is really an operational matter. How quickly can we spin operations up? So if I could direct it there, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, just to, I guess, I think the chair is on to something here. I mean, if it's more targeted amendments to legislation, then obviously it takes less time for us to do a legislative proposal, it takes less time for committee to review it. If it's a change to regulation, that also goes faster. So I would just invite, and the committee's familiar with the legislative process, so I would invite the committee to take that into account if they're looking to give the government recommendations that are more targeted. Then that will be they'll speed things up. But I would also caution that this is it has traditionally been a bit of a controversial area. So even if they're pretty minor changes to the Cannabis Act, we would still have to undertake consultations and get input from the public. So there would be that aspect to it, which typically extends the period. And even if it's not a full-scale review of the legislation that we're doing, then it would still require some significant consultation. So those are my thoughts on it, Minister. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate that and appreciate the kind of suggestion to committee, and certainly I'll keep that in mind. Just going to turn it back to members. Do members have any further questions for the minister and her staff while we've got her in front of us? Mr. Hawkins, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just because we have the minister regarding this topic, have there been problems or complaints in the industry? And I'm more referring to broad about supply chain challenges, relationship challenges, any concerns around, well, run by retailers. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we at one point certainly, well, again, I gather this is more on the retail side as opposed to on the producer's side. So yeah, I mean, as I said, we've had quite, say, regular meetings with the local producer. And I mean, the items that are being discussed today have certainly been, some of them at least have been raised by them, if not most, and in particular a lot of focus on the markup, which again we'll review. Other challenges, supply chain in particular. There have at times been some challenges with supply chains being raised. There certainly were some challenges, when the same challenges as anywhere else when it came to, evacuations and wildfires. But as far as being specific to this, it's my understanding that there were some questions around how things got moved between particularly our local producer and elsewhere, but I believe those have been resolved. That's my understanding, or how I've been informed. We have a lot of challenges getting retailers. There's been over the years a fair bit of work gone into trying to open up facilities, Inuvik for one being an example, even online sales and shifting to a private business model rather than being NTLCC. RFPs have gone out, or requests for qualifications have gone out with no response or incomplete processes. So that has been a challenge and probably does still remain one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harkins, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm just aware of a question or concern brought forward regarding the quality and supply chain issues of some of the products, and my understanding is it's been brought forward to the attention of the department, and I'm curious on, given the chance that we have all the expert witnesses here before us today regarding this general topic, just curious the ripple effect of, the opportunity of given the impacts. That's what I meant about the ripple effect, given the impacts of, it not working properly. So I'm under the understanding, I think a letter may have come into us specifically, but I'm also fully under the understanding these concerns have been brought forward to the department, which speaks to the broader issue of maybe we need people to look into things and a little bit of transparency on some of these things being reviewed. So I'm just curious, the minister's position or understanding of the issues right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the minister for a response.
Thank you. So I think, sort of listening between the lines, if I may, I think I know the matter that's being raised. It was raised, there was an issue that was raised specifically from one of the retailers here with respect to a supply chain concern that he was having. And there was some direct contact to my office as well as to the department. We were led to believe that it was resolved. I don't have that detail in front of me, but I wonder if I might go to our Deputy Secretary. She might at least be able to give some context to what the issue was, just to ensure that there is transparency on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any further questions from... Oh, sorry. I was reading an email. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding of an issue raised was that there was variation in the THC content for cannabis that was purchased. Obviously, we can't guarantee the level of THC content when we're buying it. There is variation in small amounts from suppliers. So we were going back and forth with one of our vendors on that, and really came down to disclosing and being a little bit more transparent with respect to what we can expect in terms of purchasing and that variation in content. So that's the one I'm aware of. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawkins, follow-up?
Okay, well, I would just, I'll just say we've been sent something. I look forward to maybe some response or further look into it. On a separate issue, back to the original topic at hand, what I'll say is, yes, when I was asking earlier about committee report and recommendations, no different than added or asked differently by my colleague, the chair. I look forward to the department responding to our suggestions, assuming we have them, but we always have suggestions, but I look forward to the department putting some energy behind them. And the last part I want to point out is that the minister, although she doesn't represent ITI, she sure spoke quite clearly on it, how if the department's getting behind this industry, specifically this individual manufacturer / producer, see, I'm going to keep saying it until the policy effectively works. Spending a lot of time saying prosper in WT, seed funding, markup opportunities. I mean, it seems like a lot of energy to want it to succeed, but yet there's a lot of energy not carrying it to the next phase. So in other words, I mean, it begs the question why we came here. We all came here to help sort of foster, create, ignite some excitement and do things. And, sitting on this side of the table, sometimes we hear the challenge of, well, we spend more time on finding ways not to do things than do things. So that said, Mr. Chairman, it's not necessarily a question, but I do look forward to committee's recommendations, and I certainly hope the department will action some changes or responses positively without having to rewrite the complete act. I certainly don't think we have time or energy to do that, but we can probably do some good things. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the minister like to respond to those comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'll just say the same thing that I've said before. I mean, committee recommendations do matter. They are strongly persuasive. They are political creatures, and that is what we are all here as. So I'm happy to receive them. And certainly I don't disagree that there's a lot of funding that is going in towards this particular producer, and hoping that that will help them to succeed as a business in the Northwest Territories. That is sometimes different than perhaps regulatory changes that have other impacts on an area that is sometimes politically challenged in the Northwest Territories, namely with respect to the consumption of any sort of substance that some might deem to be more or less in the spectrum of things that are healthy. I mean, it's been legalized in the Northwest, it's been legalized in Canada, and it's legalized in the Northwest Territories, but there's still different views on how much people should be able to access it and with how much, with what ease. I will say I know with special occasion permits in particular, when that first was raised, which was not going back to 2022, but when it was raised with me, I will just give an example. It seemed like it should be an easy fix, only to then realize that in fact there's quite a distinct difference between how the Liquor Act and the Cannabis Act deal with that, and a very distinct difference, a very specific difference. So again, other members were actually here at the time, not me, when that came through. They may well be better placed to say why there was a different choice of words used, but there was a different choice of words used, which has made that a different type of proposition and would require legislative change. All of which is to say, putting one word back in the act might be simple, but it might have been very specifically left out. And that then makes that one word very potentially controversial. And maybe not. So when I'm saying I appreciate committee looking at it is because that one word can be the difference in having a special occasion permit or not. That one word may be exactly the reason that the original drafters of this act did not want it in there. So I appreciate the committee looking at it. It's been some time, right? Society moves on. Society becomes more comfortable with something. That is very politically powerful for all of us. So if we want to see some change, that's very helpful. And this is this process right now. So I appreciate, that's what I do. I do appreciate committee looking at it. I wasn't trying to give a long answer earlier. It is persuasive to get these recommendations, and it will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Hawkins?
No, I'm not going to delay it, but I just do, on the farm gate one, I'm just going to say if you were a farmer and you had sold eggs and you couldn't allow somebody show up at your farm and sell them a basket of eggs or even let them try an egg, it behooves me. No question, Mr. Chairman. It's just frustrating watching government do what government does sometimes, and I wish we could respond faster. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, I'm going to make one last final call for comments or questions on this one. Well, we've got the minister in front of us. I'm not seeing any hands flying up on the screen there online. Not seeing any in the room, so I think we can call this portion of the meeting finished. So thank you very much to the minister and her staff for making the time for us today, coming and presenting and answering committee's questions. We'll take a okay, so I'm just now going to open the floor for any members of the public. Are there any members of the public who are interested in presenting to committee? Okay, just a sec. Mr. Wood, do you want to chat with committee staff or? Okay, thank you. Just wanted to note that this concludes the public portion of this meeting and concludes the broadcast. So anyone who's still tuned in, the broadcast is now ending. Thank you.